Post-Pandemic Oil and Gas, Four Scenarios, with Geoffrey Ken. Geoffrey is a key reference guy in the oil and gas sector. Good evening, Geoffrey Ken. It's a pleasure to have you here again.
It's a pleasure to be here as well. Thank you very much for the invitation.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. Welcome. Please, Geoffrey, how oil companies do their strategic analysis and scenarios? But if you could explain to us first, what are scenarios mean and etc.
Oh, sure. So the idea of scenario planning came about many years ago and was pioneered by Shell, the big oil company. What Shell realized was that as they were building their business plans, the traditional practice was to pretend that next year would be the same as this year. And many times that's plausible, but in the world of oil and gas, where investments are often years before they become profitable or come into production, such planning models aren't very applicable. So Shell developed the idea of thinking about the future not as a single scenario, but as in multiple scenarios. And in so doing, that allowed them to anticipate multiple possible future environments that they could find their oil business active. And that allowed them to then identify the investments that would be best across a whole range of possible futures. And so that's where the idea of scenario planning came from. It's now widely used in many industries, and oil and gas companies are particularly fond of using scenario planning because of the amount of time it takes for oil investments to come into market.
And they are strong in this situation because it's not so common to have so strong scenarios and analysis as compared to oil companies. They are very strong, no?
Yeah, very, very strong in this, but scenario planning itself is not hard to do. It requires some effort, but it is relatively straightforward to execute. And I personally use scenario planning as a way of thinking about the future of oil and gas. As one example, if you compare Europe today, Europe is already indicating their intent, which is to be carbon neutral by 2050. So that's a kind of scenario that you can, since they've made a decision that this is how they intend their future to be, you can start to think about that as reasonably plausible that they will someday get there. But if you look at North America, United States, for instance, the US has not signed on to the Paris Climate Accord. And so their vision of the future looks to be quite different. So right away, you can see two plausible futures for oil and gas. And so that's why thinking about scenarios for the future in multiple ways is such a powerful concept. And this applies not just to oil and gas, but governments, regulators, trading blocks, societies, all have the potential to think about futures in these multiple ways.
Perfect. And what are the factors that are considered in scenarios and analysis? I mean, including beyond the business ones, I mean, social and environment. Can you explain us this?
Oh, yeah, of course. Let me, if you don't mind, I'll bring us some slide on the screen, perhaps. I'm not sure if it'll show correctly to, telephones and tablets and so forth, but perhaps this might provide a way to illustrate what I mean. Let me pull up a screen. And so I like to use this quotation from Yogi Berra. He says that it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. So I think the future is all you can predict. But this is his quite funny line. That's his name. He's a famous American baseball player who was very folksy and had a fun way of talking about life and baseball. But let me show you some of the factors that I think we should think about. First one is technology. What do we know about technology with some confidence? Well, we know that it's getting smaller, Technology is always getting cheaper, it's getting much faster, and it's becoming everywhere. It's no longer just something you see in just large companies. So how do you think about the future when technology is going in this direction? Another critical factor is demographics. What do we know about demographics? Well, we know the population growth is largely in Asia, maybe parts of Africa, but in North America and Europe, the population is very stable. In some parts of the world, the population is actually going down. We know the population is getting more urban and less rural, and it's more older in many nations. The populations are getting older. How does this factor into your thinking about energy? Next is healthcare. The pandemic has shown us that many of our healthcare systems are not very well set up to cope with significant changes that might come about from through the pandemic. Related to that is that the systems have proven to be quite inadequate, not very resilient to coping with change, and very costly. And then, of course, capital markets. Capital markets are seeking value. When interest rates are very low, where do you find value to allow your stock portfolios to grow and to achieve the investment targets? So the hunt for value is very strong. And capital markets place a very high value now on digital companies. Like if you look at the valuations of Alphabet, Amazon, Google, Facebook, these are now trillion-dollar companies. And whereas if you look at oil and gas companies, just ExxonMobil as a good example, is no longer in the Dow Jones top 30 companies for the first time in 100 years. So capital markets are placing much higher value now on digital. And that does not look like it's going to change. And of course, another factor is the environment. We seem to be experiencing more extreme events. The environment, the planet seems to be getting hotter, and seas are rising. So these are the kinds of factors when you think about digital, when you think about scenarios of the future, these are the kinds of factors that companies need to take into account and think about.
Great. And sorry, let me be back here. And you mentioned a recent post that you published, the terms nationalism and globalism. And how analysts can consider these items in the scenarios and analysis?
Well, in the way of, as I think about globalism and nationalism, if you think about the world since 1945, so back to the end of the Second World War, the world has been largely embracing globalism. But of late, just over the past 3 or 4 years, we've seen the rise of what I call nationalism. And so this creates two extreme views of the future, globalism and nationalism. So globalism is a way to think about that is open markets, free trade, the free movement of people and goods and services, low cross-border trading friction is what globalism aims to achieve. Whereas nationalism is more country-specific, more protectionist, more isolationist, and less embracing of the outside world. Many countries now, because we've had to respond to the pandemic by closing our borders, is reinforcing certain tendencies to think of the world in what I call these nationalistic terms. So a way to think about the future is we have this strong, long-term story of globalism, and we now have this a rising pace of nationalism, and we're on a spectrum. There's no one clear place where every country will align, whereas which creates uncertainty around how the future will look.
And Geoffrey, there is a movement in the United States, specifically in the United States. I mean, in England, maybe a little bit too, but in the United States, very strong. They are calling reshoring. How do you see reshoring? Is it possible to bring back factories and manufacturing plants to the US? But need to see costs and prices and everything related to that. How do you see this movement?
Well, I definitely see the potential for onshoring into the United States or into countries that formerly had left the manufacturing world. I definitely see strong potential for those countries to bring back into their nations the manufacturing. And the reason for this is that under, say, carbon taxation policies or carbon taxation structures, the true cost of carbon now gets factored into costs of manufacturing. And as goods move around the world, say you start manufacturing in one part of the world and you move it to other parts and you pull all of your components in from various locations, suddenly the cost of manufacturing, when you consider the carbon cost, is now greater than if you simply manufactured the products in the location where the products are going to be consumed. And in the United States, this is now very apparent. It is now possible to onshore considerable manufacturing and pull it back from international places where things were manufactured. This is very true with robotics because of robotics and machine assembly. And another innovation is three-dimensional printing or additive manufacturing. Those technologies, if you bring those together, do allow you to onshore what you used to offshore, and that manufacturing now becomes a domestic capability. So it's very, very real.
And there's a kind of nationalism, no?
It's very definitely a kind of nationalism, and under a pandemic world where perhaps you may have been sending buyers into international countries to source and local manufacturing. That's now cannot be done because of the pandemic. So rather than being able to travel to those locations to secure your supplies, it might actually make sense to bring those supplies onshore and manufacture them locally. So the pandemic supports nationalism to a significant degree.
That's true. That's true. Geoffrey, nowadays it's so common people speaking about fossil fuels versus green energy. Is it a false paradox? And I suppose we need to use fossil fuels for a long time, maybe not the same level, the same quantity, 100 million barrels a day, but maybe 90, 80 something. And how do you see this transition and this view?
Yeah, I mean, it's very much a false economy as I see it. Yeah, if you think about fossil fuels and gray energy, it's also on its own spectrum of green versus gray. And as I say, it is a false economy because today we don't have any aircraft that I know of that can fly without using fossil fuels. Now, aircraft are only 2 or 3% of global fuel consumption. So it's false to think that we will somehow, within a very short period of time, be able to fly from country to country without fossil fuels. It's the technology simply does not exist. On the other hand, the technology to drive a vehicle from instead of a fossil fuel car, a battery car, that technology is very real. So most automakers are now shifting over their manufacturing because they see the power of the battery cars as a lower cost to manufacture because battery cars have far fewer parts, so they're cheaper to make. They're better for the environment. They're cheaper to own and operate. And so car companies are very much betting now that we will be in a green energy world for personal transportation. So it's not right to say we are going exclusively green because we cannot for air travel, but we can for personal transportation. Even that, though, will take quite a long time to unfold because there are 1.2 billion cars on the road. It'll take a very long time to move them all out of, from fossil fuel over to battery. That transition is going to take years to unfold. It won't be fast.
Geoffrey, in your picture, where are located the oil companies? Maybe we could separate upstream and downstream. They are more to the gray energy or the green energy? Of course not, but the globalism, the nationalism, where are located them?
Where are they? Well, it's a very good question. If you think about this as four quadrants, with the upper right up here. Let's see if I can point correctly.
Yeah,
Up
it's
here.
perfect.
Yeah. That's gray globalism. So companies like ExxonMobil, who are still betting strongly on fossil fuels, but also need to operate in a global world, do see the world in these gray global terms. My country, Canada, is very much seeing the world as gray global. Our federal government is definitely aligning itself with the Paris Climate Accord, but Canada, as a nation, is very reliant on fossil fuel exports. So we're caught in this problem politically, where parts of the country want to see a far greater shift to green, but the economic reality of Canada is that it is very much gray. So in Canada, the oil companies, Suncor, Cenovus, Imperial Oil, all view the world as continuing to need gray energy, and they need a global environment within which to operate. If you went to gray nationalism, though, so this is the other side right above here, gray nationalism, I equate that more to the United States. The current U.S. administration under President Trump definitely favors America first. That's his slogan. And this isolationist, nationalistic tendency, also his policy is to favor fossil fuels. He's been a big proponent of coal mines and coal mining, opening up oil and gas reserves for exploration. So think about much of the U.S. government in this area. If you go down to global green, so that's this corner. Let's see if I can point correctly over here. Here it is. Trying to see if I can get my camera right. If you think about this as a green global, this is where BP, Shell, Repsol, and other large European oil companies have declared their vision or their view of the future. They see the shift to green energies as being very strong. They also need to operate in a global world because their business models are already global, and so they're favoring this world. The countries that are what I would call green national, so that's in the bottom corner right here, where I'm sitting. This is the countries that are nationalistic in view, but still have made very strong statements about green energy. And I put countries like Norway in this category, China to a degree, who are very restrictive and who can operate within their country, but they've also made very strong statements to say they wish to drive to a green future. So I put those countries in that bucket.
How do you see, Geoffrey, the possible results of the United States election from Republicans and Democrats? you see some possible difference in terms of oil opportunities and let's see, restrictions for them, or is only more, let's see, speeches?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really spend too much energy trying to forecast the American political system. That's an animal on its own. But President Trump has been historically favoring fossil fuels, America first, and very isolationist, protective nationally. And so his administration, I definitely put him into what I call gray energy focused and very nationalistic. So right up here, potential President Biden, Vice President Biden, when he was in the Obama administration, has made statements favoring more of a transition to green energy, which is down below, and he's definitely not signaled this ongoing nationalistic embrace from President Trump. So if you think about it in those terms, he's probably more going to be in this quadrant over here to the bottom right, green global, taking America back into its position as a voice of reason globally, and with some alignment towards a better use of green energies within the country.
Geoffrey, considering some uncertainties, these uncertainties that's very strong, very big ones, how should companies, oil companies, should, let's see, make their how can we say, the plan for the future? How can they see the future? Because it's a cloud, it's a very strong cloud, a gray cloud.
Yeah, it's very hard to predict. Let me share just some things about in the very short term. What sorts of things should oil companies be thinking about? So first is this whole virus pandemic situation that we're in. How long will it truly take for us to get to a vaccine? And will we play this game of, I don't know if this translates very well into Portuguese or Spanish or other French or German, but in English, we have this game called whack-a-mole. And it's a game where, you have a hammer, and when a little animal pops up, you hit it on the head with the hammer, and then another one pops up and you hit it over here. This is like virus whack-a-mole. We're going to have flare-ups, and we're going to have to do things to put the flares down. How long is this going to go on for? Like, we don't really know. Another problem is, what is normal now in oil and gas? In my country, in Canada, what's normal is that an operator will drive out to the production fields to inspect the oil wells to make sure they're working. But under the pandemic, that's now considered unsafe, because you have to be in a vehicle for a long period of time with some other person, and you might get sick. So we're changing our business processes now to reflect this new normal. We don't really know which of these processes are going to stay forever, or which ones are going to change and go back to the way things were. Another one is this rise of automation. I don't know about where you are, Armando, and the situation locally, but I know in North America, the demand for automation in oil and gas is very strong because of this concern about people working too closely together. So the more we can get machines to do work, the better the situation is viewed to be. So strong growth in automation. Next is this huge overhang of product that we have already manufactured in oil. If you looked at the charts for oil in January, February, we were at 100 million barrels per day, and by the end of March, we were at 85. And meanwhile, the oil industry continued to produce all of this product for which there was no demand, and it's now sitting in storage tanks. We don't know how long it will take to empty the tanks. Some estimate it's at least a year before we get back to normal, just in terms of the manufacturing cycle. And then, of course, what about OPEC Plus? What about decarbonization? How fast will these things unfold and correct themselves? Just today, OPEC was in the news saying that they are hopeful to keep the restrictions on production to continue to reduce the inventory overhang. But some countries in OPEC are already saying we can't keep doing this because with the volume so low and the depressed price, we can no longer meet our treasury obligations. We need the hard currency. So OPEC is feeling some real pressure now around how to cope with the pandemic. Just these factors alone, Armando, these create this fog of uncertainty about what oil is going to look like just 10 months from now. But as I say, a few things seem clear. Technology is still going to race ahead. It will take time for the pandemic to sort itself out. People will want to start driving, if they have a car, They will want to start driving it again, and so those pressures are not going away.
So may I understand that you are saying that gray is not totally gray and green is not totally green?
That's right. I think if you think about this in those terms, I'll come back to this picture. We're going to be on a spectrum here. We won't be all one, and we won't be all the other. And same thing with globalism and nationalism. We won't be one or the other. We will find ourselves in some curious mix of all of those.
Perfect. Let me ask something like that. Uh, um, here. So we could say that you mentioned the new normal. May I say new abnormal? Because from here
Yeah.
to the future, everything will be something not, let's say, regulated and well observed and predicted. Do you see this way?
Yes, I definitely see this way. The different countries will respond in different ways. So, for instance, in China, many of the restrictions have been released, and so the Chinese economy is working very, very well. And so, from a Chinese perspective or China perspective, things are back to normal. Now, normal does not include international travel yet, but it does include domestic travel, and China's a big country. So their planes are back traveling and their trains are moving, and that's their new normal. It's below where they were, but it's starting to feel very, very consistent. But I'll use my country in Canada. Canada, the U.S. border is closed. Like the border, Canada and the U.S., we used to have millions of people would cross the border every month. Now, nothing. So it feels very abnormal, but it's starting to sense as well, feel a little bit like this is what our future is going to look like. And so it's very, again, it's back to this. It's inconsistent, doesn't feel the same for everybody, and what is normal, or what people sense of normal now, is very, very odd, or feels very strange to other people.
Perfect. Do you have a training program for these four? I mean, you have something like that, no? A training program that you mentioned in a post.
So what I do with this particular presentation is this is my message for companies that are sort of staring at this world. My message is the future is very uncertain for oil and gas. It's very hard to predict what the future is going to look like. But we do know that change is inevitable, driven by automation, technology, demographics. The only thing that's different is the pace will vary. So from one country to the next, the pace will be quite different. Digital technologies, though, that's everything from artificial intelligence, machine learning, cloud computing. These technologies are helping companies fix or find solutions for COVID-19 and the pandemic. Like just as we're meeting today on Zoom, like who would have thought this was going to be our new normal? And yet this is where we're at. So digital is helping us overcome the problems of the pandemic. It helps oil companies lower their cost, and it helps our society in general reduce its carbon emissions. So digital is becoming very, very critical to our future, and you can see it in stock prices for digital companies. They're just so strong. And so my conclusion from this is that although we may not be in the golden age of oil, which was, lots of demand and lots of upside and potential, we are definitely in a golden age for digital, where digital innovation, digital technologies are going to be very, very strong for some time.
Perfect. I would like to ask you your final comments, but say to the audience that we are going to post this video in LinkedIn, and people that wanted to talk to Geoffrey can make comments and interact with him after. So please, Geoffrey, your last comments, something that you see that I'm not asking you.
Mm. Well, I mean, my takeaway of this is that I believe human ingenuity will eventually achieve get us a vaccine which will service us very, very well. I also know that there are many people who refuse to take vaccines, and there will be some countries who will be slower than others. So this virus is going to be with us, unfortunately, for a very long time. And what is abnormal now, Armando, as you say, was our new abnormal. This is very quickly becoming, to me, this is going to be our new normal, and this is just how it's going to be. And for those organizations who are in my mind, thinking that we can still, wait it out, I don't think that's a wise move now. I think that the pressure is to deal with this. Unfortunately, is now very strong, very real. And so delaying is not a good answer. We're going to have to embrace and figure this out.
Perfect. So welcome to the new abnormal world with contingencies, resilience, and redundancies that we need to have these three axes available. Thank you so much. Exactly. It was a pleasure to have you here. We appreciate this conversation.
Thank you very much for extending me the invite. I very much appreciate our association, and as you can see, I still have my my coffee and my tea.
Your coffee, your tea. That's great. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
You're
the
welcome.
audience, have a good day too. Thank you. Bye-bye.